what we're going to do now is have a slightly more detailed look at what we talked about yesterday in this period between 1900 and 1940, which was an era marked by as much or more overt racism, overt violence, overt tension than any other period in the 20th century. So it was a very difficult time for Latinos, and as we will see, that the tension that was present in society took a number of different forms. So I'm going to talk for a while, and then Maria is going to do several interactive activities with you after that. So just as a review, these are the 3 points that we'll be covering, which you heard about yesterday. And I'm going to be saying a little more about them and also showing you some sources that relate to this. So each of those topics has its own heading on our outline in the Google Drive thing. Each one has a table that contains 10 to 15 primary sources as well as the text that goes with it. So if you're interested in working on any of those, you would find the material pre-prepared there. So let's start with labor unions. The history of organized labor in this country is a complicated one. You probably don't get into it a whole lot in your teaching. But it was important here in the West, or in Colorado, particularly around the issue of mining. Because the miners' union, the United Mine Workers Union, was an early and very powerful union. It had already unionized coal miners in Colorado by the first decade of the 1900s, and it remained important all the way through. The background to the labor union movement was that in the 1910s and 20s, the economy of Colorado was growing. Owners and operators, farmers wanted labor. They were glad to have people coming in from Mexico and from New Mexico. They were welcomed. They were seen as valuable assets. As the Depression got going, however, and it was very severe in Colorado, by the early 1930s, there was great resentment of what were considered foreigners, people who were taking jobs away from native-born true Americans. So that's sort of the context for what was going on as far as the unions were concerned. Now, for the coal miners, the main union was the United Mine Workers of America. It was quite a militant, aggressive union, and it believed firmly in striking. It felt that organized workers had to strike. It was the only weapon they had as against the operators and the owners of the mines, and that conditions needed to be improved. They needed better pay. They needed safer working conditions in the mines. They needed better housing for their families in these camps that were set up around the mines. The second union that was active in this area, at least temporarily, was this particularly interesting one, the IWW, the International Workers of the World, known derogatorily as the Wobblies. The IWW was an international union, strongly socialist in its principles, that advocated workers all around the globe joining together in this big composite organization on the grounds that they all faced similar challenges. That regardless of the type of work they did or the country they were in or where they were located, workers had a common identity and they should recognize that and cooperate with each other. It was a very idealistic union. It had a lot of sort of middle-class members who wrote a lot of rhetoric about it. There was a lot of education going on by the Wobblies about the importance of organization and unions and so on. They didn't do very well. Nobody much liked them. They were kind of too far out. Even most of the workers thought that this was a little kind of pie in the sky and flaky. So they had quite a big educational impact. So the Wobblies also tried to organize the coal miners. They didn't do very well on that, and we're going to hear more about them in a minute in another context. So the longest and the most difficult strike in Colorado was organized by the Mine Workers Union. Started in 1910, and it went on for 4 years, which is an incredibly long period for a strike, because you figure most unions have some kind of a kitty that they've built up from dues that they can use to help pay families for the families of the strikers while they're out of work. But 4 years, no union had that kind of money. So the strikers were really desperate by the end of this strike. And the long strike, as it became known, affected miners in the southern Colorado coal fields around Walsenburg and Trinidad, Aguilar, but also the northern ones. So the bulk of the mining was still in the southern part of the state around 1910, but the northern mines in our areas were already moving into production. So our local miners were involved in that long strike too. They suffered a great deal. We have interview evidence of how difficult life was for the families of those strikers. Furthermore, they were kept in the camps surrounding the mines that were on strike were sealed off basically by military forces. So the mine owners were very distressed, of course, about this union activity and about the strike, and they turned to local authorities and then to the governor, who sent in what were in effect militia troops to patrol, to go around the edges of the camps and to protect the mines. So there were armed forces then at these mines that were on strike. You've probably heard about the Ludlow massacre in the southern Colorado coal fields, when a group of miners and their families who were living in a temporary tent camp were attacked by the militia forces, with a lot of people killed, including the women and children, the families who were living in those camps. The northern miners in our area sent emergency help down to those families that survived and so on, but the net impact of the Ludlow massacre was to end that strike. The miners just couldn't keep it going anymore after that. So that long strike ended with no beneficial results for the miners. And indeed, it meant that the owners of the large complexes that owned many of these mines, which included John D. Rockefeller, who owned the big mine, the Ludlow mine, and many of the others in the South, the mine owners agreed that they would ban unions. So as a result of the long strike, unions were now illegal in the Colorado coal mines. Well, the event that really shaped our history in this region was the Columbine strike. The Columbine mine was just outside Lafayette, and those miners went on strike in 1927, despite the fact it was not a legal, fully recognized union strike. Several of the other mines went on strike too, but the Columbine held out longest, and it got a lot of attention. So people were coming in from other communities to support them. So there were big protest marches. In one march there were said to be 3,000 people, who included miners from all over the region, plus local people sympathetic to them. The women and the children marched up and down every day during the strike, just outside the mines. And here, as was the case elsewhere, the camp where the miners lived was closed off, was sealed off with fencing. The militias were called in. They had machine guns on towers just outside the camp, pointed down into the camp. They brought in scab workers to try to keep the mine going, although that wasn't very successful. And in 1927, during one of the protest marches, which included the women and children of the miners as well as the miners themselves, the militia opened fire. And it's not quite clear how many people were killed, but probably 8 or 10 were killed and like 60 were wounded. So that became known then as the Columbine Massacre in this area. It too failed. The miners had to capitulate. And the last attempt at a strike was in 1935, when the northern fields, the southern fields were pretty well shut down by then. The northern fields went on strike once more. Yeah?
You mentioned the Columbine strike. Is the Columbine strike noted for that because it's from the Columbine mine?
Yes, it was
the Columbine mine?
Just to the east of Lafayette.
Okay.
It's sort of on the edge of what would now be the border between Lafayette and Erie.
Is there any demarcation of it?
Those mines are now closed up. They're fields. The only demarcation is that every now and then a house or a car drops down into where one of the mines used to be, but no. There is a demarcation. There was a terrible disaster at the Monarch mine where there was an explosion and 6 miners were killed in it, including Joe Jaramillo, and there is a marker for that.
Where is that?
Well, there's a long story about that. It was originally placed right over the top of where the Monarch mine head was, which then turned out to be under where the Flatirons Crossing shopping center was built. So then it got moved. And there's something called Vera Park, right near there, and the monument is now there. Yeah.
But there's no marking in what they called on strike.
No, there's no visual memory of that. So we have some nice newspaper evidence about all these strikes. We can follow them right through. With the newspaper material, you have to accept the sad fact that it comes off of microfilms, and so the quality is just not very good, but it's generally legible. So this is one of the notices of a strike. One of the people in the previous session pointed out how interesting the wording is, that they were idle. Yeah, I mean, it's not just that they are laid off because of the strike or temporarily out of work, but they're idle. So that's these newspaper accounts are wonderful because they are totally written from the perspective of the owners and operators of the mines. So it is the valiant troops who came in to try to keep these mines safe and protected, and so they're a nice example of having your students look at bias in objective newspaper reporting. Okay, well, turning to the sugar beet workers. Nobody had tried to organize the farm workers in Colorado before. That was, as we mentioned yesterday, farm workers are hard to organize, and we'll be talking about that a little more later. But the Wobblies, who were so idealistic, they looked around and they said, look, farm workers are being treated worse than anybody. We really need to get in and help provide them with some organization so that they can demand better wages and better living conditions and better working conditions too. I mean, if you'd spent all day stooped over with this little short handle plow, you know, you too would develop serious health problems, which a lot of the farm workers did. So the Wobblies organized a strike, and as far as we know, it's the first farm workers strike in Colorado. It may be one of the first in the West, although California farm workers had some localized strikes before that. What's so interesting about the newspaper accounts of this strike is that we know that who the agitators were. They list the names of the people who were the organizers. And these agitators were people who were going around from one farm to another talking to the workers saying, look, we're striking for better wages, better working conditions, will you join us? Well, you can imagine the farm owners, the Great Western Sugar, which organized the whole process, and then the individual Anglo farm landholders who were hiring these workers. They were all just as unhappy as the mine owners were. So, not surprisingly, troops were brought in. And the sheriff then of Weld County and this northeastern part of our county mobilized troops to drive around and try to pick up these agitators, which they did, and arrested them. So what we know then is that whereas the mine workers were heavily Latino, but also some Italians, some Southeast Europeans, people from a lot of different backgrounds, the farm workers, the beet workers, were virtually 100% Latino. And of these agitators, it's so interesting the number were women. So we know that women were working in the beet fields, but they were not just there. They were going around and trying to persuade other people to join the strike. So this is some pretty serious. If you're talking about people who don't have much power, mainly farm workers, that is a very powerful role for women to have been assuming. Okay, well, now we get to the Klan. So there was some degree of racism in all three of these towns that we're focusing on anyway, as of 1920. What the Klan did that was so damaging and had such long-term negative consequences was that it legitimized overt expression of racism. It legitimized racist actions against people of color. And in this area and in most of Colorado, it was directed primarily against Latinos. The Klan first appeared in the local papers. This is, I think, 1922. Turned up in Boulder first. And the first indication we have is this article, which is really quite a stunner, which describes the appearance of the Klan. So first of all, we have to remember they're wearing these white robes and they have these pointy hats on, so you can't tell who they are. Their wives probably made their uniforms, so one guesses, and they were selling sheets and pillowcases cheap to be used for the uniforms. But when you looked at them, unless you recognized the man's shoes, you didn't know who it was. what this article describes is a parade of 60 vehicles, cars and trucks, at a time when in the early 20s there weren't a lot of vehicles around yet. A parade of cars and floats went through the downtown of Boulder, turned around and came back down a parallel street. It was a long parade. It moved very slowly. Every car was filled with men with their uniforms. Every float was covered with men in their uniforms. They were handing out leaflets as they went, which described the noble aims of the glorious knights of the Ku Klux Klan. And the license plates of the cars were all covered, so you couldn't tell whose they were. The floats had signs on them that said things like, "America for Americans," "We fight for our rights," "We true Americans are Christian," by Christian meaning Protestants. So it was out of nothing. Here was this creepy parade of these long procession of cars and vehicles moving through the town without any ability to tell who those people were. We have a copy of the leaflet. It's a wonderful teaching tool that describes their goals. And it, right from the beginning, makes clear that although nobody seems to have been killed in Boulder by the Klan, they were nevertheless prepared to take aggressive action. So we know the Klan was burning crosses in the yards of people they didn't like and in public places. We know that they focused particularly on Latinos who were not appropriately deferential and submissive. They put hate letters, scare letters under the doors of those politicians who were not with them. And most politicians were. The governor, the state legislature, the town councils, almost all of those groups were dominated by overt open Klan members. This was not some little bunch of kooks off on the edge. These were the solid citizens of the town.
What year did you say they first appeared in Boulder?
22. Their peak was in 25. They won 25, 26. They won a whole lot of big elections. The leaflet that we have also, in addition to talking about their goals, which were Protestant, white, male, Bible-based, it has a pretty scary final paragraph, which says, "We find ourselves amazed and full of respect at the tolerance of these noble knights of the Klan, who have simply accepted whatever criticisms a few people were throwing at them, rather than doing what might have been natural and expected, which was to tar and feather their opponents or to ride them out of town on a rail." So the Klan then was making it acceptable to write these really overtly racist statements. And remember that the main Klan newspaper is published in Boulder. It's rhetorically acceptable to be racist, and it is practically acceptable to be racist. So the Klan legitimized a lot of ideas and actions that have remained, even though the Klan as a political unit sort of fell apart in 1926. But it made these things acceptable. So there's some nice teaching material visuals here. This is a Klan meeting taken by a reporter who snuck into a meeting west of Boulder, probably in 25 or 26, always with the flag and the cross. And these are a couple of cartoons from the Klan paper. This shows the Klan defending the country against illegal immigrants coming from other places. And then this one, they were being criticized because they were always hidden. You couldn't see their faces. And so this cartoon says, "All right, we'll show you who we are." He strips open his robe, and what do we see is it's sort of Uncle Sam, you know, true American beneath the robes.
So you mentioned the decline of the Klan in 26
Yeah.
here in Colorado.
Yeah.
Wasn't that quite a bit earlier than the rest of the nation?
What happened in Colorado was specific to it, in that the guy who was the head of they had these gorgeous names, but the chief Klan member, the exalted something of the exalted Kliegel of the Clavern, he was found to have been stealing the funds of the organization, and so politically it collapsed.
Oh,
But
internal corruption.
how odd, isn't that strange? I know. What is this country coming to?
Is that nationwide or just statewide?
That was just in Colorado. But what we need to realize before we move on to repatriation is that although the Klan publicly sort of dropped out of view, it did not cease meeting, and the signs that it had encouraged to be put up continued. The no whites only, white trade only, no dogs Mexicans. In Longmont, there was a big banner across Main Street at either end of the town saying, in effect, get your brown butt off the street before sunset. It was illegal for a dark-skinned person to be out after dark in Longmont. And those things continued. They did not go away when the Klan collapsed. Longmont was known as the Klan capital of Colorado. It is clear that the Klan continued, the Longmont Klan chapter, the Clavern, kept on meeting well into the 20th century. And we've had 2 people tell us that it still is meeting now.
I've heard that there's a house in Longmont, it's near the post office. Is that true?
I don't know. I don't know if it's true or not. There is certainly a house that has a great deal of Klan paraphernalia in it, kept in a sort of an inner room that looks as though it is used regularly. So I don't know. I'm not sure anybody knows for sure, but certainly it was still meeting in the 80s and 90s. And it's illegal. I mean, it's been illegal in this country for a long time, but it didn't just disappear.
Is it true that the Dickens Hotel or the Dickens Restaurant Opera House had one of those signs for the longest time still?
I don't know. I'm not sure, because I do know that the upstairs of the Dickens Opera House was a big hall, and that was rented by Latinos to hold dances in. And there was actually a pool hall there that was owned by a Latino who's the father of one of the people who's coming tonight. So I don't, if the lower level was racist, at least the upper level was not so much.
That's a little bit odd.
Yeah. Okay, so Klan. Maria's going to talk with you about this. How do you teach the Klan? Do you teach the Klan? Then lastly, repatriation. The problem by the 30s was that jobs were incredibly scarce. And there were now people of Northern European background, English speakers, Anglos, who were willing to take the kind of very demanding, difficult, poorly paid work which they wouldn't have taken previously. If that's all there was, they would take it. So by the 30s, the Latinos, that is the Mexicans and the New Mexicans, were seen as threats to American labor, American-born, white Anglo-American-born labor. So there was an incentive to push them out in terms of labor competition. It was also the case that a number of the Latinos were themselves unemployed. They had come up to work in the mines or the beet fields, and those labor opportunities weren't there anymore. And some of them were now qualifying for public welfare. That was bad. That meant that taxpayers like you and me are having to pay for them. So that was another bone of contention. And we know in California, where millions of people, or at least 1 million Mexicans, are thought to have been deported in the 30s. We know that in California, a number of the people who were deported were in fact union organizers. So this was another nice way to get rid of some of these people. So one of the odd things in Boulder County is that, so we'll see in a minute, among the groups that paid transportation costs for Mexicans to get them to the border with the idea the Mexican government would pick them up from there, among the people who paid for that was Great Western Sugar. Now, I really don't think that Great Western Sugar was probably acting just out of the goodness of its heart, out of compassion for these people. If we had a list of who was deported, I bet, remember those agitators from the beet workers strike? I wouldn't be at all surprised if a number of them had been given a choice between jail sentences or accepting deportation. What happened in 32 was that a number of organizations in the county, including, this is the Boulder County Commissioners, agreed to put in money in order to pay transportation for families that wanted to go, Mexican families that wanted to go back to the border. And as we've seen, their reasons for doing that may have been mixed. We don't know exactly what mixture of ingredients entered in, but they did authorize that money. We have a nice eyewitness account. This is Emma Gomez Martinez, the woman we talked about yesterday, after whom the park was named, whose wedding photo we saw. When she was a child, she came in from Erie with her dad and saw people, trucks of people being carried down the street, deported. And the interesting thing about this example is it's in 35 or 36. I think it was probably 36. In 36, the governor of Colorado decided that we really needed to take action against all these foreigners. And he therefore ordered that all Mexicans in the state be deported. And by Mexicans, he seems to have meant anybody who looked vaguely brown and probably spoke Spanish, which means that all the new Mexicans then who had come here, and we saw yesterday there were a lot of them, they too were supposed to leave. He ordered that they go, and surprisingly not everybody went. Some who were pushed out then wanted to come back, and that was the point at which he called in the state militia to seal the southern border of Colorado. Every single person coming back in who looked Mexican had to display proof of identity and display money, cash in hand, and that they had a job. That barricade didn't last for very long because it was so clearly against the law, and it was repealed rather quickly, but it was in place for several months. So if we're thinking about contemporary issues, Colorado begins to look a whole lot like Arizona, and this is something that we need to know about. And that, what Emma's describing, would have been in that period. Here are some of the lasting residues of Klan activity. These are not from Boulder County. We don't have any pictures from Boulder County, but that's the sort of sign that continued here, and that was indeed present until the later 40s and 50s, when they were taken down in large part through the pressure brought by veterans. So I will stop there, and Maria will take us on.
Okay, so you have 5 minutes. Did you need any more time?
Nope. Well, maybe you have questions, but I think you're going to have a chance to deal with some of them in your discussion.
So I'm going to explain it a little bit on how I do it. I know there's different ways based on your training and how you've experienced it in your classroom. So what I have given you is a name tag and the questions. So put your name on there, and let's try to form a circle as best we can. We can use the outside of these tables, and then maybe bring it around here so we could have a closed circle, please. And let's see if I can do this. So first of all, the purpose for Socratic seminars, as most of you might know, is to have good, authentic, meaningful conversations, to give opportunity for people to speak in a circle where to build comfort with defending their point of view and stating their opinion and agreeing, disagreeing respectfully, those kind of things, just an oral practice. We have Marjorie's presentation, but a Socratic seminar for smaller kids, for example, could be a picture. One of the things that I have done in the past are some pictures from the book Mi Familia on gatherings, family gatherings. There's a picture there about the curandera, to bring up conversations for those kids that are familiar with that, or for kids that are not, to introduce them. It could be a poem, it could be a quote, it could be just about anything. The main thing being having a good conversation for people to have an opportunity to practice their oral language, especially for second language learners. I have a group of procedures that I have that I'm going to share with you if you're interested. If you're not you haven't been or you haven't had a chance to do a Socratic seminar, I can share that with you. But it does have some of the procedures and some of the things that you can do with it. For example, what participants do in a good Socratic seminar. These may be things that your students brainstorm. For example, be prepared, refer to the text, be present, participate, project voice, be respectful, encourage one another, disagree respectfully, be aware of tone of voice, body language, no rolling of the eyes, that kind of thing. Open to new ideas, listening to each other, being patient, keeping an open mind, being honest, authentic, and knowing that you do not need to raise your hand. We're just going to have a conversation. So this is one of the things that I have in my shared document. So if you care to have some of this, you can come up and I can share it with you. I have it in Spanish. There's also the Socratic seminar timeline based on the times that I had, which basically is 5 minutes for room setup, which is doing of the circle. I think I am going to ask you let's do that really quickly as I'm talking, to kind of form I think you guys are okay. If you can just like make this circle over here, Deanne, I think you're good. So we're doing the room setup, 5 minutes, and then we give each other 5 minutes, which I won't, but for the sake of students. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to add, so I do these often in my classroom. It's a nice time to teach kids to use academic language, to use the stems.
Uh-huh.
So often I'll put those on the board.
Excellent.
And just so they know, like, so how do I disagree respectfully? Like, how do I
Excellent. Yes, that is exactly what. Yeah, we could post those up or on on the smart board or whatever. Thank you for sharing that. So then we allow them, if you assigned a text or they saw a movie or whatever, give them 5 minutes to pair share about just to refresh on what they need to know. And then there's a discussion tracker. If there's a student that maybe did not do the homework, did not prepare with the text, maybe that person can be tracking what the others do as far as who talks and who doesn't. And what that is just a circle. If you guys could put your names so we can see them, because I'm going to select a tracker, and that tracker is going to track who the speakers are. This is a good way to monitor who's participating. If you want to use this as a P&P at the beginning grade, you can give them a grade for participation, for the type of questions they have, for defending their point of view. Whatever your objective is, you can use it as this, and you can kind of scaffold that up and up the ante with, okay, next time I am going to grade you, I expect you to participate or whatever. But there's one person that could be the tracker. Anybody want to volunteer, pull out of the circle and do this for us? Okay, Vanessa, thank you. Do you have a pencil? There's one right there. So if you can just kind of, in the order of the people, of the way they're seated, just take their names and you're going to track who does the talking and who does not. And then after the 25-minute discussion, depending on your time and when you get ready, then there's the tracker share out who shared and who needed more encouragement, who didn't, and who do we want to encourage to share out more. And then strategies to improve what we do. Some people were disagreeing and not being respectful. How can we improve it for next time? And then reorganization of the room to put the chairs back in place. So that's also there. I've done one with a video, Wake Me Up, that we're going to do in one of my other sessions. So I have questions for that. If you are interested, they're already there, but you can also tweak them for your need and your level. And then there's the objectives that I look for. Whatever your standards are, you can customize this to yourself. I did some of the WIDA ones that include defense point of view, knows the concept of justice and government, or there's certain things in the 4 and 5 of the WIDA standards from the oral speaking that I think we can use this to grade them on. So I have that there. I have done others, questions for other seminars, so I save them because then you can use them and improve them for the next time. At the end, there is reflection, kind of like an exit ticket that you can do with making it better, optional if you want to. So this I have on a shared document, like I said, and I can share them with you then. All right. So you have the questions. So you know the text, or that's the expectation that you know the text. So you want to make sure that we have good, authentic conversations, and when you pose questions, you want to make sure that they're open-ended and they get to what you want them to do. The other thing about Socratic seminars is they can go to other topics, and that's perfectly fine because the ultimate goal is good conversation for the kids to practice their oral language. So it can take a twist, but if you want to reel them in again, then you go with the questions, and you bring them in with the questions, or they're off or whatever, or if it lends itself to another question that's not written with the questions, well, you pop it in and you keep the conversation going. The thing is for them to be talking. For me, once I get started, I step out. I try not to do eye contact because I'm not part of the conversation, and neither is the tracker. So we're going to be out of the circle. The circle needs to be closed when you're in your actual classroom so they can participate. One of the things that I'm going to ask you to do that I practice with the kids is if people are speaking and kind of taking over, you want to encourage that person. Why don't you encourage, Susie to say, hey, Susie, what do you think? Or what's your opinion in 810 or whatever, just to bring people in to see if they want to chime in. Because eventually those kids are going to be the ones that we want to encourage to participate. Otherwise, we're not meeting our objective, which is to get everybody to practice and speak and defend their points of view. Okay, so you have some questions. So we're going to practice this. So today we saw a PowerPoint based on race, conflict, race, and violence. First question I have for you that I'm going to have you go. I also want to remind you, no need to raise hands. Just talk one at a time, respect each other, and just chime in and try to participate the best you can. Now here is the first question. If you are a worker and have no power to negotiate for a better wage or working conditions, what are some options for making your employer listen to you? So I'm going to step out. You may be the courageous one and start, and then I'll guide you. We want most participation from everybody. So remember to encourage your students to encourage others, especially the ones that are comfortable with speaking. Say, why don't you ask so-and-so, anybody, Aiton, what did you think about that, or what's your opinion? Okay, very quickly, before everybody comes in, we did this before. I'm going to just pick your brain very quickly with the next topic. Just for a second, one of the things that we talked about is how do we present delicate, sensitive information to kids? How can we go there without being called into the office because some parents are calling in about what are you teaching my child? So what are some things that you can brainstorm? We did this earlier. I won't show you what they said. Eric, do you want to jot down for me ideas?
No, put it down. We're way short on time, so as quick as you can go.
Okay, just very quickly. Well, you know what we can do to make it even quicker? This is what we came up with.
All right, really fast.
This is what we came up with on the last one, if you can add to it. So just read those off, Eric, would you?
Use realism.
At the time, this is what it was. It was real. We're going to use this derogatory term in the context of this because that was the time, but not, now. So we're not going to use that term, in the classroom to offend anybody, but that's what it was then. Kind of, yeah?
Next one. Establish respectfulness. Climate at loving in the classroom.
Establish a loving climate in the classroom, yeah. All right?
Feel good about that?
Yeah?
You approve.
So building a community, if somebody's being offensive to somebody, use stories, use poems to say, this is not okay.
Consider the age of the students when teaching sensitive materials.
Yeah. Whoa. Communicate standards with parents and units of study, give them a heads up. This is what we're going to cover. This is our purpose. This is how we're going to tackle it. So they're not surprised and are calling in. Be prepared as a teacher that you are comfortable as a teacher and that you are knowledgeable on the subject and know how to present it according to your community and your children. So that's what we came up with in the previous one. Anything else you would like to add that's not there? So
I
we
think
can.
that you're always safe if you're presenting unbiased facts.
And a variety of stories.
Yeah.
Okay.